The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Luke. Jesus said to his disciples, "A rich man had a steward who was reported to him for squandering his property. He summoned him and said, 'What is this I hear about you? Prepare a full account of your stewardship, because you can no longer be my steward.' The steward said to himself, 'What shall I do, now that my master is taking the position of steward away from me? I am not strong enough to dig, and I am ashamed to beg. I know what I shall do, so that when I am removed from the stewardship, they may welcome me into their homes.' He called in his master's debtors one by one. To the first he said, 'How much do you owe my master?' He replied, 100 measures of olive oil.' He replied to him, 'Here is your promissory note. Sit down and quickly write one for 50. Then to another the steward said, 'And you, how much do you owe?' He replied, 100 cores of wheat. The steward said to him, 'Here is your promissory note. Write one for 80. And the master commended that dishonest steward for acting prudently. For the children of this world are more prudent in dealing with their own generation than are the children of light. I tell you, make friends for yourselves with dishonest wealth, so that when it fails, you will be welcomed into eternal dwellings. The person who is trustworthy in very small matters is also trustworthy in great ones, and the person who is dishonest in very small matters is also dishonest in great ones. If therefore you are not trustworthy with dishonest wealth, who will trust you with true wealth? If you are not trustworthy with what belongs to another, who will give you what is yours? No servant can serve two masters. He will either hate one and love the other, or be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and mammon." The Gospel of the Lord. From time to time, children will ask me, "Father, do you think Jesus would have liked football?" I said, "Of course he would." Then they move on to the deep theological questions. Would Jesus have been a Vikings fan or a Packers fan? I say, "Oh, that's very complicated. I have no theological opinion about that. My vestments might have an opinion about that, but I have no opinion." Oftentimes when children pipe up about this, the parents interrupt and say, "Oh, Father, don't you think it's awful? The way so much money is spent for football, oh, their salaries, and oh, that big new stadium and all the rest." And I think they're a bit surprised when I answer according to the parable in today's gospel. It's a very curious gospel. I hope you notice how strange it was. Because Jesus, in a certain way, commends the dishonest steward in the parable. Why? Because he was a worldly man and he worked hard at it. He was into his money, his ambition, his career, and all the rest. And if you listen long enough to get the point of it, Jesus said, "At least he is committed, unlike the children of light." And isn't that true? We see all around us people hardworking, ambitious, devoted, making sacrifices for all sorts of things, building temples for $1 billion to their religion. And Jesus would not necessarily have put that down. What Jesus says here is this: if there are people willing to be that devoted, that dedicated, that sacrificial to what they're into, what they care about, why aren't his followers as dedicated or as devoted? Just last week, a week and a half ago, big new study about volunteering. And again, Catholics are about at the bottom of all religions when it comes to volunteering. And I know there are a lot of Catholics who are very generous with their time and volunteering, including a number of you right here in church tonight. But as a whole, the picture is not impressive. I'm sure you also know that Catholics rank right around the bottom of all religions with their giving, their financial contributions. Again, there are many wonderful, generous Christians, Catholics specifically, but there are many who don't have any commitment at all in that regard. What our Lord is saying is this: how can it be that those who are devoted to football or anything else can put up so much, make so many choices and decisions and sacrifices for what they consider important in life, when we as Catholics are so casual? Historically, there was a heresy. It was called Quietism. The Quakers were probably the most famous example. And Quietists basically believe that God does everything and you do nothing. You basically sit there and let God do it all. And it's a heresy because even though God is God, and yes, God is the source of everything, our faith tells us that He gives us a part. He calls us to cooperate with His grace. We don't just sit back and do nothing. But it can become a culture for us, a culture in which we expect to work hard, really hard, over here, over there, with this, with that, goals and accomplishments and all the rest. But when it comes to our faith, maybe we'll give God a few leftovers. Just last week, I got an email. You get these from time to time. It was someone who had gone to our fall festival, our wonderful fall festival last weekend. Oh, this person wasn't happy. They said it was terrible. You should fire whoever was in charge. Fire, everything was bad about the fall festival last week, you know? So I do what I always do when I get an email like that. I go to my files. Oh, okay. Woodbury, not just Woodbury. Woodbury. Oh, very generous. Last year's contributions, 2 digits. I'm not going to tell you how much. It was somewhere between $10 and $99 for last year. But oh, they have an opinion. Do this, do that. It can become very easy for us as Catholics to let everybody else work hard, to let everybody else with their own dreams and ambitions. But Jesus says, at the very least, that man in the parable should be commended because he worked his tail off to get what he needed. And he said how much we as children of the light could learn from that. No, there's nothing wrong with a career. There's nothing wrong with working hard on our career. There's nothing wrong with a stadium. There's nothing wrong with all sorts of worldly goals and ambitions. But the question we must ask as Catholics is, what are we doing for our faith? Do we do anything with sacrifice, hard work, dedication? Do we ever roll up our sleeves for Jesus Christ and work really hard? There are many wonderful things in this life, but there's nothing as wonderful as heaven. Nothing as important as heaven. Nothing we could aim for with as much drive and dedication as heaven. Jesus Christ says to you and to me today, what is it that you're willing to make sacrifices and work hard for? Are you willing to roll up your sleeves for heaven?